We have a special guest joining us in the virtual studio today to talk about everything you need to know about the recent developments with the Louisville women's basketball team on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has had you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinals Sports Zone, and I also do some PA announce work for the university in various sports. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, good friend of mine, the women's basketball beat writer for the State of Louisville, and the host of the Off The Walz podcast, Brian Trent. Brian, how are you, man?
What's up, Dalton? Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, man, definitely so. We'll talk everything that there is to know currently about the Louisville men's basketball team who are continuing a impressive 2021-22 campaign. We'll start out by discussing why Emily Engstler is not only one of the best defenders in college basketball in this year, but also one of the best in Jeff Walz's tenure here at Louisville. We'll discuss the team's recent offensive surge over the past couple games, and then we'll end the show doing a little bit of in-depth analysis on the post-production that the team is getting from both Olivia Cochran and Liz Dixon, respectively. We'll start with Emily Engstler. Look, Brian, before I have you answer this question, I feel like I'm under contract to say this. Anytime you hype up one player, there's always a person or couple people that always take it as discrediting, another player or a handful of other players. I am not saying that whatsoever. I'm not saying that, the players, that have come in the past for Jeff Walz's team since 2007 have been bad defensively. There's been a lot of great defensive players, but I truly think that Emily Engstler is one of the best that he has had here at Louisville. Brian, what stands out the most to you about what she brings to the table defensively?
Well, first, she's long, and she's very intense when she plays. And coming from Syracuse, playing the zone that they play up there, that really helped her to really play passing lanes. So she plays passing lanes really. Everybody on this team plays passing lanes really well, but she plays them even better. And she's 6'1", but I mean her legs and her arms are so long. I mean she plays way taller than 6'1".
She really does, and on average right now through the first 23 games of the season, she is averaging 2.5 steals and 1.7 blocks per game, respectively. So, like you mentioned, she's doing a great job of being able to, be able to depict where the offense is going to go. She's also a very good rim protector. But another thing that I like about Emily, and one thing that I go to pretty much almost every game. And what I see up close is you can hear her talk. Like, she's very good communicating on the defensive end, especially in terms of defending the pick and roll. I mean, in terms of, preseason additions, Jeff Walz hit a home run here.
Yeah, he did. And she really became the alpha on this team probably 3 or 4 games into the season. She put her mark on this team, and you can hype her up. And I've talked to Coach Walz, and I've talked to Coach Purcell, and everybody about Coach Pineda, everybody about this. And nobody else on this team is going to get mad for us sitting here hyping one player up, because this team plays like that.
I'm glad to hear, and I think that really, I know that's not what you're alluding to. I feel like when I said what I said just a couple minutes ago about people thinking you're discrediting, I think that's really just people wanting to complain about anything, like fans on the outside, especially Louisville fans that are saying, "Oh, you're living in the moment. You're the victim of recency bias." But am I though? I mean, Emily Engstler, what she's doing this season. I mean, in my opinion, I am a little biased. She's the best defender in college basketball. The stats back it up. If you take the time to watch Louisville play, it's very evident that when she's on the court, the defensive tenacity is extremely different. The dynamic is extremely different. despite Louisville still having a good amount of great defense players, like Mikasa Robinson's very good defensively. I'm very impressed with Alana Smith on the defensive end, Kiana Smith, etc. I just think, Emily Engstler takes this defense to a height that was from like right here to maybe right here, and that's not a knock on any of the other players. I think that's just kind of indicative of how good she's been.
Well, and one of the things that really helps her is how aggressive she is at rebounding, because she can be guarding somebody on the 3-point line, and when a shot goes up, you just see her full out sprint through the lane to try to get that rebound. Mm-hmm. That's what sets her apart from everybody else.
Yeah, she's leading the team with 8.5 rebounds per game. She's just has a high motor on both ends of the court. Kind of brings that the whole New York toughness type of vibe that I think that she embodies and she almost embraces, because I know that but for those who are not aware, she grew up playing with the boys and the guys out on the outdoor courts. So you have to have a ton of skill and a lot of passion to do that, and especially a lot of toughness. I think that's where I'm kind of getting around to. I want to focus now kind of a little bit more on the big picture from when Jeff Walz stepped into Louisville. Obviously, I think if you ask the consensus of Louisville fans, most fans will tell you Angel McCautry is the best defensive player to come through Louisville. You're not going to get any opposition from me. Leads the program in steals. I don't think that record's ever going to be touched, honestly. But outside of that, there have been a handful of really, really, really good to even great defensive players. Emily Engstler belongs in the top 5 of that conversation, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. I think if Jeff Walz would have got his hands on freshman Emily Engstler, I think she would have challenged Angel for the steals lead and probably would be hands down the best defensive player that's ever came through Louisville.
I think you're definitely onto something. Who are some other names that, like, when you hear Emily Engstler and you say, okay, she's one of the best defensive players of the past, 15 seasons? Who are some other names that you kind of gravitate toward as other players being in that conversation, in your opinion?
I mean, Dana was a really good defensive player. She was 100%. Really fast. That's really helped her. And Mikasa, really, really good defensive player. And then, you go back farther. Shoney was pretty good on defense, not real great. Becky Burke was a good defensive player. Monique Reed was more of a pure scorer, so she played good defense, but she was more of an offensive threat.
Candace Bingham was a pretty solid
defensive player. Jazz Covington was a really good defensive player. If you bring up Louisville and you bring up, the top 10 all-time players, Maisha Hines-Allen was a really good defensive player. Sam Fearing, that's who
Kylie Shook, one of the best.
Sam Fearing is kind of who I relate Emily Engstler to.
Yeah,
their attitudes, their look. Sam's from New Jersey, Emily's from New York. They're both aggressive. They both have that New York, New Jersey attitude. That's kind of who I relate her to.
It's like that toughness and swagger, and they kind of like mesh, and it's a very, very, just incredible sight to see on the court, because you see the talent. Both of those players are very talented in their right mind. I think that they're a little bit of a different player. I think Emily's more of a wing, Sam's more of a traditional, post player, but they do have that incredible tenacity and that toughness and that take no shit mentality that I'm not saying that other players at Louisville don't have, because I think that Louisville's a very tough, mental team. You see that in the end of games when they're, battling back, down on the road and stuff like that. But I think that, Emily Engstler gives me those vibes as like a Sam Fearing. Kylie Shook is another one that I think, one of the best rim protectors in Louisville history. So, I think that this really is more so, an epitome of how good Jeff Walz's teams have been defensively. We talk about the great scoring numbers. Asia Durr is another player who's good defensively. Asia, Shoney, Dana, Monique, Angel, so on and so forth. They're probably missing 5 or 10 that are, really, really great to good scorers. We don't necessarily talk about how good of defensive teams that Jeff Walz has had. I think that this is a very, very, high praise for Emily Engstler, who, in my opinion, not only changes this team's trajectory offensively, but defensively, it's just a whole nother ball game.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, he's had good defensive teams before, but even he said, Coach Purcell said, Coach Pineda said, this is far and away easily the best defensive team he's ever coached.
Yep.
I mean,
and that's saying a lot. Like that he's not saying that lightly. Like, this is a very good defense. That's not saying that like the other teams have not been up to standard. They have been. We've seen how good they are. This is just kind of an indication of how great this respective team is. I want to transition over into, we talked about the defense of this team. Offensively, they have been absolutely peaking lately. In the past 2 games, a combined 193 points. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends at BetOnline, the sponsor of the show. BetOnline has had you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs, right to the big game not in a couple weeks, less than a week away, I should say. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. It has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, right along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline is where the game starts. Like I mentioned, here with my good friend, the women's basketball beat writer for State of Louisville and the host of the Off The Walz podcast, Brian Trent. We're talking everything currently about the Louisville women's basketball team, currently trying to get another win streak just like they had at the beginning of the season, coming off that loss against NC State. They have compiled some very solid victories, but I think it seems like we're seeing this offense start to click as a collective unit. Obviously, the past 2 games, not necessarily against great competition. Both Miami and Clemson, Clemson and Syracuse aren't the greatest. Both are under 500, so to speak, but a combined 193 points in the last 2 games. Brian, what have you seen differently from this offense that you hadn't seen earlier in the season?
Well, I wouldn't even just do them 2 games. I mean, they played 4 in the last 7 days, and 3 of them were on the road. And right. I mean, they scored almost 85 points per game in those 4 games, shot 54% from the field, 40% from 3-point range. And I think the emergence of Hailey Van Lith into what everyone thought she was going to be all season was the catalyst to really kickstart this offense.
Brian, I feel like, not saying you and I maybe even myself at some, I'm not, to go without fault. I feel like we weren't patient enough with Hailey. I feel like, year one, didn't necessarily get any time to bond with the team before her freshman season due to the COVID restrictions and stuff like that. Had to play in the shadow of Dana Evans, so to speak. Year 2, she started off a little rough shooting the ball from behind the arc, but it seems like she's starting to finally put it together, like 34 points. Look, I mean, the level that she played at against Clemson, that's the level that we kind of saw in high school, like the no one can guard her, type level. I feel like the fan base wasn't as patient with her, although we've seen players take a little while to get going. Dana Evans didn't get going until year 2. Asia Durb was injury-plagued year 1, got going year 2. Hailey Van Lith looks to be following the same trajectory.
Yeah, I think last year, she came out of the gate really hot. Like, she started her freshman season better than, most freshmen do. And then we went in that really long COVID pause. And that really hurt her. That hurt her probably worse than anybody else on the team, it seemed like, because you really saw her points per game fall down. Her shooting percentage went down. She came into this season, started out like 1 for 19 from 3-point range or something. And everybody was like, oh, my gosh, the sky's going to fall. What's wrong with Hailey? And, like Coach Purcell and everyone else said, she's a competitor. They told her, don't stop shooting, and she didn't. And she finally found her stroke. Right around UConn going into ACC play, she really found her stroke.
I agree, and I think a lot of it – I think that, when you kind of break down, her scoring tendencies, I feel like, she was kind of hunting for that 3-point shot early in the season, like trying to manually get going, trying to override the slump, so to speak. That's just kind of what I saw. Now I feel like she's letting it come to her. She's, attacking the mid-range more. You're seeing her, shoot the mid-range, a lot more than she did earlier in the season, taking it to the basket despite only being 5'7", 5'8". But outside of Hailey, sure, Hailey scored 34 in that game against Clemson. They still scored 93 points, and they scored 100 against Syracuse. Talk about some of the other players that have kind of stepped up along the way.
Well, I think that's one thing that helped Hailey was when Emily came in and really started playing really good offensively, and Kiana's been shooting the lights out the whole season. That really helped her to take that step back and let them two carry the offense while she figured it out.
Right.
In the non-conference, Alana Smith has been fantastic off the bench. Chelsea Hall, she don't score a lot, but the way she facilitates the offense is better than a whole lot of point guards out there. Just the way she sees the floor, the way she pushes the ball up the court, her passing IQ is off the chart. Having that senior grad transfer in there, and then Mikasa coming in to spell her. I mean, her basketball IQ is just as high. She facilitates the team just as well. And I think it starts with those two at the point guard that really gets the motor running on this offense.
I agree. And we also have to talk about the emergence of Peyton Verhulst. Another player that I think struggled a little bit. I think the speed of, the high Division I level, you saw her get a little hesitant, a little flustered, lacked some confidence early on. But we're starting to see her let it fly a little more. She's starting to look to score more and not just pass it every time she touches it, getting more acclimated with the speed and getting more comfortable. Jeff Walz told me before the season she doesn't necessarily do one thing great, but she does almost everything else very, very good. We're definitely seeing that on the offensive end because when she's in, I think her movement without the ball and her size, she's 6'1". She's not a small player by any stretch. Once she starts, tapping into that offensive potential, it's going to be scary, what she can be at this level.
So at media day, I asked Coach Walz about that, and he said Peyton's never seen a shot she didn't like. So she's going to shoot. When I had Coach Purcell on my podcast, me and him was talking about her, and he said, yeah, Peyton's a freshman, but she came in June. So she was only a freshman until the UConn game. As soon as we started conference play, well, she's a sophomore now. So she has to play like a sophomore. And she has really stepped into that role. She's gotten more comfortable in the offense. She's got more comfortable with the offensive sets. Her passing's getting better. Her defense is getting better. She still fouls a little bit too much, but offensively, she really has her shot going.
And her emergence, along with Mikasa Robinson and Alana Smith being big, really kind of helps fill the void of Norika Kono, who we're not necessarily sure if she's going to play. Has there been any more developments? I know, I think it was last week or the week before, where Jeff Walz, saying we hope that she'll be back with us this season. But people put a lot of emphasis on that word hope. Have you heard anything about alluding to her status coming up, or is she still kind of they haven't said what it's come out to be, and I'm not going to speculate or anything like that. But we just wish her the best of luck in her health and her recovery.
All I've heard was when he got asked the question in the post game, and he said she was dealing with medical issues, and they was just giving her as much time as she needed to take care of whatever she needs to, and they're not going to rush her back, and hopefully she'll be back with the team this season.
Hopefully so. If Norika, if you're listening, if anybody on the around Norika in the program, we definitely wish her the speediest and quickest but full recovery out there. Another key aspect of this team being very, very solid in conference play is the stepping up of the two post players, Olivia Cochran, Liz Dixon. They have been very, very solid in the past 10 games or so. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry when you have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket? It allows you to save time and money. It's a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. The prices are reliably low for every customer. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Do yourself a favor. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Transitioning over into the front court. Now, look, I think that, it's no secret that this team gets most of their scoring from the back court and Emily Engstler. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the progression that we've seen from both Olivia Cochran and Liz Dixon. I tweeted this out yesterday for those who didn't see it. Liz has scored at least 12 points in 3 of Louisville's last 6 games, while Cochran has scored at least 11 in 5 of the past 10. Even when they're not on in the same game, their consistency really helps, and it is showing, in almost every game. Talk about, let's start with Liz. She's, been scoring well over the past, 6 games, but even when she's not scoring, she's still affecting the games in more ways than not.
Yeah, Liz had a surprisingly really good junior season last year. I think she came out of nowhere and, she had, multiple double-doubles. She played a really good junior season. And coming in this season, there was a lot of hype about her. Me and Chrissy Banta talked about it on my first episode that, she was the one to look out for. And she started kind of slow. I think her minutes wasn't real great, so she wasn't getting a whole lot of playing time. But as the seasons went on, she's got in the game more and got more into the flow. She's really good on the defensive end. She has really good hands. She has really good ball IQ. She's all the steals and ties up she gets. She's a very good rim protector. I think her on the defensive end is more of a asset than the offensive end, even though, she has scored in double figures and, like you said, 3 of the last 6. But her defense, because she's taller and longer than Olivia, that she gives us more of that rim protector, kind of like a Kylie Shook did when she came in for Sam Fearing.
Liz is, what is she, like a true 6'5", so, she's probably the tallest, rotation player that plays, obviously, but I think you're right. I think most of the value comes on the defensive end. Offensively, what I've been impressed with her with has been her ability to be able to be the, get the ball in the high post and be able to pass down low, find the, the outlet to the corner, or also, in the handoff and in the delayed handoff. I think that Jeff Walz is really utilizing that a lot in the first 3 quarters against NC State. That delayed handoff, and the off-ball guard movement was, key to, getting the offense going. Olivia, on the other hand, she's oozing with confidence right now. She's shooting the mid-range, at a very high clip. She's, doing very well around the rim. She still kind of gets a little too ahead of herself sometimes when she attacks the rim a little bit. Kind of her shots go a little too hard at times. But ultimately, she's really becoming a force like Liz. A little smaller, but I think she's really using that craftiness to her advantage.
Yeah. Olivia had a really good freshman season. She was an all ACC freshman player, a phenomenal freshman season. Well, coming into this season, everybody figured that out. So they started helping down on her and double teaming her, and I don't think she was ready for that. And I think that's really what caused her really slow start, was she started getting frustrated when she was getting double teamed. And now that it's moved on and we're getting, Emily down low and Hailey's driving and Kiana's driving and Mikasa's driving to the hole, they can't help down on Olivia Cochran anymore as much and double team her as much anymore, especially as the offense is really clicking from 3-point range and the drive and dish. So she's getting more one-on-one play, and that's really where you're seeing the uptick in her game coming from.
And I think it's interesting when you watch this team because Jeff Walz, he kind of he rotates them pretty frequently throughout the game. Always keeps them fresh, and I think that's one thing is he keeps them fresh to where it's like, okay, you have to deal with Liz Dixon for 5 minutes of gameplay, and boom, now you have to deal with Olivia Cochran for 5 minutes of gameplay, and then you're just kind of rotating that. And do you think that that's kind of another key to the advantage as some teams have like one great post player, but when in Louisville's case, when you can throw two at a team, at different times and always keep that production, that's got to be some sort of an advantage, right?
Oh, for sure. Because when you have Olivia in there, she's good on the defense, but she's more of the offensive threat, and Liz is good on the offense, but she's more of the defensive stopper. So when you're rotating them in and out like that, then you're like, well, who's in, the offense or the defense person, defense person. But when you say about the one good post player, I have to go back to the NC State game because that was probably the best collective game I've seen them two play all season.
Oh, yeah.
Because they shut Alyssa Cunane down.
Until the fourth quarter when every time you looked at her, it was a foul.
Yeah, until the fourth quarter. And up until the fourth quarter
until they turned into the Golden State Warriors.
I mean, up until the fourth quarter, that was the best game I think Olivia Cochran has played since she's been at Louisville on both ends of the floor.
I definitely agree. She was absolutely incredible, and I thought Liz Dixon, although she didn't score, I don't necessarily know that she scored. Did she? If she did, it was very little.
If she did, it was very little. But her impact on the defense.
Oh my gosh!
Because she had Alyssa Cunane. Alyssa Cunane didn't know what to do in that game.
In all 3 years, or 4, I guess you say, but the 3 preceding this, she has had her way with the Cardinals. I mean, she's been hard for anyone to guard on this team, and I thought Liz Dixon did the best of almost maybe anyone in the country that's guarded her this season so far, sure. And also Olivia Cochran. But I'm interested to see, how to see how they can continually, put up the consistency in terms of numbers and stuff like that. But listen, Brian, I definitely appreciate you having me on. Yeah, thanks for having me on the Off The Walz podcast. Appreciate you, buddy. But I definitely appreciate you for coming on. Do yourself a favor, plug us into your social media. Give any lasting thoughts to Card Nation before you get out of here.
All right, Card Nation. I want to thank Dalton for having me on. You can find the Off The Walz podcast on Apple Music and Spotify. You can follow me on Twitter at @btrent_OTW for all the latest on the women's basketball team. And I post all my podcasts on there too. And I just want to thank Dalton again for letting me come on. I'm usually on that side. It's nice to be on this side and get to spit facts by myself one time and not have to figure out how these questions I got to ask.
We will definitely have Brian on as postseason gets underway here in the next month or so. Before we get out here, first of all, a couple quick shouts. First, the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. Go check that out at cardinalsportszone.com. The Locked On Bets podcast. You can get that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcasts. As I mentioned, Brian is a women's basketball beat writer for the State of Louisville. Some great people over there. Go check out their content at the State of Lou on Twitter. There's a great podcast network that has been established and it's continually growing. So check out all the great shows over there and great personalities. But that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Go Cards.